Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Auckland Beekeepers October club meeting. Again, over Zoom due to Auckland lockdown, and our thanks to Dave Henricks and Auckland University for providing us with the technology to be able to reach out and continue these club meetings remotely and under the current regulations. Welcome everybody who's dialing in, and we'll kick off very soon. The club's still going well. The club hives are all in good shape, being looked after by various club members, and they're continuing to be looked after. And one thing I just note here as a reminder for yourselves, of course, we have the certificate of inspection is required by the end of next month. That's the end of November. So if you already have your own decker, then you're obviously exempt from submitting a COI back in. But if you do not have your own decker, then you'll need to have your hives inspected by somebody who does have the authority to be able to inspect other hives and get them to sign your certificate of inspection and get that returned back to the agency by the end of November. So you've got about 6 weeks. There's a list of authorised inspectors is up on the API website. So you can go and have a look at that. There are a number of Auckland Bee Club members who are in there on that list. Otherwise, you may have somebody that you already know from previous years or whatever, and that you're comfortable with. So if you would probably go earlier rather than later, maybe before your hives have built up to be 5 boxes high, and therefore having to go right down, all the way down to the brood and right the way through to have a look. Maybe get in earlier rather than later and get those hives inspected, get your certificate signed off and get that back into API. Then you'll be compliant and you won't have a chase up contact from them and trying to find out why you haven't submitted your COI. So that's just a reminder for everybody in there. We've got several different talks this morning. So we're going to start off talking about cut comb. And we've got 2 presentations with different approaches and methods on cut comb here. First up will be David Davies and then Angela Sinclair talking about cut comb and how you can prepare that. Remembering, of course, that any cut comb must be off the hive and away by 31st of December so that you don't risk any contamination by Tootin. So we'll run through those and how you can do cut comb. Dave Henricks will then talk about splits and artificial swarms. And then we did have down looking at hive records, but we covered this in a similar Zoom talk last year where Carol did a presentation on hive records. So that was included in the links that were sent out a couple of weeks ago. And we'll repeat the link out to the relevant meeting. So we thought rather than simply pretty much repeat information from last year's one, we'll give you a link and you can go back and have a look at last year's talk from Carol on hive records, their importance and the sort of information that you're going to want to have in those records. So instead of that, we will have a talk that was recorded by Ken a day or 2 ago with Heather Hetherington, who is doing research into macrophages. And so she'll talk a little bit about that. Heather is actually intending to come and talk at our club meeting in November. We have her booked in, so this is just an introductory sort of interview that Ken has conducted with Heather. And we'll also do a bit of a Q&A. So if you've got questions about things that you're finding in your hive at the moment, what's right and wrong and stuff like that, then you can put them into the chat text box down there. You can ask a question, and the panel can answer and give you their best information and best estimates as to how to answer your question. So that's all from me. I'll stop talking and hand over to David Davies to talk about cut comb. Thank you.
So interesting with PowerPoint, you say that you're setting up a PowerPoint presentation on cut comb, and Microsoft actually automatically gives you this heading slide. The only thing that they didn't tell them was that it's actually the bees that put the honey in the comb, not that way. Look, I'm a hobbyist beekeeper, and in the next slide, thanks, Dave. Just by way of introduction, yeah, over 40 years, I sort of don't like to remind myself too much about that, but we love our comb honey in our family, friends and neighbours. My immediate neighbour just turned 100 last couple of weeks ago, and he attributes that to the regular supply of cut comb honey over the last 40 years. Keep 2 or 3 hives in the backyard, get around 100 kilograms of honey most years. And I like to keep my hive administration to a minimum so that I enjoy the cut comb, but I don't like putting too much unnecessary work into the hive. If you don't like comb honey, then you might want to look the other way for the next few minutes. I assume everybody knows that cut comb is edible straight out of the hive. And just a comment that this that I'm talking about is one man's method, one beekeeper's method of looking after his hive. And there's many options, and Angela will have other things to say, for example, but let's have a look at the next slide. Thanks, Dave. Just in the spring, which is right now, I'm using a 3/4 honey super for this method. The reason being it's lighter to lift at my age, and with full depth frames, we're not using any wire in these frames, so a full depth frame can get a bit likely to break. So I cut strips of foundation, medium, just ordinary medium foundation, about 30 millimeters wide. You get 6 or 7 of those out of a full depth sheet, and I wax them into the groove in the top bar using melted wax. So as I say, there's no framing wires. If we go to the next slide, we can got a picture of that. You can see a wax strip has just been, a foundation strip has just been waxed into the top of the frame. Obviously, this frame is upside down. I hope I didn't have to say that, but I will. When you put the wax in, you've got to then make sure that the strip is vertical, that it's not leaning over to one side or the other. Otherwise, you'll end up with the comb going off at an angle instead of straight down. You do lose some honey production by using this method. We're only putting in a starter strip of foundation, so the bees themselves are making the foundation in effect as they build the comb to fill that frame. And when they're making wax, they're making less honey. So that's just a point, but the goal of this is to have lovely comb honey, so we're not worrying too much about the total volume of honey. And that's just by the way. So let's have a look at the next slide, Dave. So 9 frames in a super these days, and that gives you a nice fat comb. The bees will, I say generally neat and tidy, but if the comb goes off at an angle, just keep an eye on it, because if it starts going off at an angle, then the next one will go and it'll just go right through the box. And you can pull a frame out if it's going off on an angle and replace it. Or you can leave it and just take the clean comb that's neat and tidy, and the rest of it can just be crushed and the honey extracted that way. You can put a full frame in the middle, and that will help with keeping everything neat and tidy. But I find personally that in general, the bees will put the comb in a very uniform pattern in each frame. And what's next, Dave? Having set the box up in the spring, we just sit back and let it all happen. And in my case, there's a lot of Pōhutukawa comes through in November, December usually, and once they're fully capped, we take the frame out. And the beauty of this, you can, well, like any super, you can take the honey out progressively. You don't have to wait until it's all finished. And with that December 31st deadline that Steve was talking about, it pays to get moving on it as soon as it's capped, get it out, and you can put replacement frames in, and the bees will keep working. Be gentle. There's no wires in these frames, so if you try and spin them or anything like that, well, they'll just get blown to pieces. That's not the aim of the game. They're generally very stable, but just keep in mind there's no wires in there. And of course, the Tūtin laws are there for cut comb, because you can't test the honey in a cut comb. You've got to destroy the comb in order to get the honey out to test it. So that doesn't work. Let's have a look what's next. I think this is a picture of the author as a young man. Yes, we that's a full capped frame, 3/4 frame of honey ready to be processed. Oh, thank you, Dave. It's very kind. If you look closely, you can see the top of that frame where I'm holding it. The top 30 mils or so is actually a slightly different color, and that's because of the strip that's underneath there, whereas the rest of the comb is all made by the bees. And the next slide has got a couple of pictures of this, Dave. So that comb, I've got a stainless steel, a Butte stainless steel, very firm tray. It's just on the kitchen bench there, carving knife. Lay the frame down, it's nice and flat. Cut the comb out, and it sits onto the tray. And so I'm cutting out a comb width of right across, and then up the sides and across the bottom, and so that comb flops out. You can see I've got 4 comb boxes lined up behind the frame there, ready to use that cookie cutter on the right to chop that comb into the right size pieces, use a fish slice and just slip it over into those cut comb boxes, which can be purchased. That cookie cutter is one that I made before they became commercially available, but you can buy them in the bee shops now. And I think this is one more slide, 2 more slides, job done. So there's the comb in the box, ready to go. I just serve that up on the table, give it to the neighbours and in a box without worrying about taping it or anything. Put it in the freezer. It goes in It goes in the freezer, they stack up, and it thaws out, and it's just like new. It really freezes really well. So I've got cut comb honey year round for everybody. And I've made the comment there that because there's no foundation in there, the center of that comb is very light, and it's not the heavier foundation wax that you get if you'd put full foundation in. It's made by the bees, 100%, and it's quite nice, actually. Now the question is, what about the leftover comb? That in the freezer, 12 months, so all year round, that in 12 months' time, it comes out of the freezer, thaw it out, and no problem at all. So you can see this is pretty simple sort of a procedure. So last slide, Dave. Now here's what I call the trick. With the bit of comb at the top of the frame, I cut that on an angle so that it's tapered, and drain out the or scrape a bit and drain out the rest of the honey that's there, and that goes back in the hive. They clean it up the same as you would with any wet comb, and so you don't even have to use a starter next year. I've just put those back in the hive the following year, and away we go again. So that's very straightforward. I've said, the quantity of honey I get off of 2 or 3 hives. I haven't measured it exactly, but I think it would be about 50-50 comb and liquid. You've got the drainings from the what's left in the comb. You've got some comb that is not neat and tidy, but too thin or too fat or whatever. And with one thing and another, I end up with probably half the honey available still. So this doesn't exclude the beekeeper getting liquid honey out of the hive as well. So it's really the best of both worlds. Those boxes, I find you can reuse them. They wash up fairly clean, but I don't know whether it's the heat or of washing or the cold in the freezer, but they do tend to form little cracks in the corners, and once that's happened, you really need to toss them out. But I do get to reuse and save the planet a little bit in that respect. You've got to buy these boxes. I don't know what they are, $1 each or something, Steve, but you're saving on paying for wax foundations, so it's really not a big deal. So that's pretty much my method of a simple way to present cut comb.
Excellent, thanks, David. Yeah, cut comb is gorgeous. We all know it. What I'll do now is a different method of preparing cut comb from Angela. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So my method is slightly different, but the outcome is exactly the same. And that's, I've got a cover on my box because I've been working on it. What I do is to make sure I don't get that crazy comb, because the same as David, I'm not using any wires. I just can't be bothered with the hassle of wires. I haven't really got the time. So I have a half sheet of foundation, plastic foundation. So I just buy that as a full 3/4 sheet, cut it up the middle, put it on one side, leave a little bit of bee space on that edge. I use popsicle sticks in the top and the bottom, and I put these in with just a regular craft hot glue gun. So there's no waxing them in, which I have sort of tried before and I found a little bit messy for me. Then once the bees have been over it anyway, they've kind of already waxed it for this year. These are last year's frames. So, and what I get is I get a guaranteed 50% honeycomb, 50% runny honey. because my purpose with doing this is primarily for honey show entries. And this also allows me to see the colour of the honey that's in this particular frame. If I was pulling out a regular frame that was all foundation, it's very hard to see the colour of the honey when you've got the black plastic foundation. And that's, so I find with this, what it allows me to do, I'll just quickly show you the colour difference for honey show purposes. There's sort of 3 quite different colours that I can get out of a box of honey. I can get quite a dark one. This would normally happen in the early part of the honey season. This mid one is kind of around about November. And then, as David said, with the Purakawa, which is the really light honey, I definitely get that November, December, right through to January. But for cut kind, of course, it'll be off by December. So that's sort of my purpose, is really around, more focused around honey show entries. So it works well, but you go, okay, well, what's the difference? So you've still got a big hole here. So surely they'll just keep making crazy comb through that. So what I've done is I alternate them. So the next one will be in the middle, and then the next one will be on the other side. So when you put all 3 together, get all 3 together neatly, they can't sort of get through. So they build it really neatly. And so it's perfect for honey show. So I don't really have to worry about unusual thicknesses. They build it really quite straight. And then it's really just comes down to cutting it out of the frame. The other thing, when I'm taking honey off my hives, I don't use any smoke. So I don't like the taste of smoke in my honey. So I only use a bee brush and just brush all the frames. Yes, it's slow, but then I've only got 2 hives, so it doesn't really matter. And then, of course, the honey doesn't taste like barbecue, so that's quite nice. So my difference is slightly different. I have a different knife, very thin, very sharp. Got to watch your fingers on that one. And that gives a very neat cut. You don't, a thicker knife is going to give you a bit of a rough cut on the edge. So that works well for me. And I have from the warehouse, of course. It's a really good solid baking tray, nice and clean. I only use this for honey, don't use it for normal baking. I've got time for normal baking. And then just a really good solid draining tray. So I leave my honey to drain. And what I would do when I take this out is I would look at it and decide which side has got the nicest colour, has got the whitest wax, and has got the lightest for honeycomb. I'm probably looking for this. I'm looking for the Purakawa honey. So I want the really nice light honey. I put the good side down, and then I just cut along all of the outside edges and lift it off, leave it to drain. And then once that's drained, I take my box, same boxes as David. I get these from the club, from the shop. They're the best price. I've shopped around. Like David, I'm an accountant, so we do that kind of shopping around for price. And well, this one has got a comb in it, which I freezes perfectly fine. I would use my knife, put that on, pretend that's up the other way, put that on, cut around it, and then I would turn it over and then just tip this up, and then I've got the right side up. And for honey show, it is important to drain out all that excess honey, otherwise this ends up swimming in honey. And for the honey show, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get it as right to the edges as you can, and you need a piece of comb that is going to get you right sort of to the top edge. So it's really full, quite heavy. That's about 480 grams. So, yeah, so while our methods are similar, they're slightly different and for different purposes. Yeah, as I say, this purpose is really primarily for honey show entries. I can get my cut comb, I can get my runny honey, and I can get a long way towards a wax block entry just from one of these boxes, because at the end of the day, I'm going to bucket extract this side and this side, and so that'll give me the honey and the wax. And that's what I do and why I do it. I'll put it back to you, Steve and Dave.
Fascinating. I'm intrigued and interested on the two different approaches there. Different solution, well, different paths to find a single solution, but absolutely excellent. Thank you very much indeed. That's interesting. Yet we have boxes in the club shop. I haven't got any home at the moment, but I will bring them back from the apiary and home so that people who are wanting to pick up, and I might need to order another box of them because I don't think we've got that many left. So it's a good reminder. I'll get some more of the cut comb boxes and have them here at home. And I also, of course, have spring treatments, foundation, some sacks and things like that, which I should have mentioned earlier on. If people want things from the shop, you can get in contact with me and then pick it up, contact us here at home. Excellent, two different approaches to cut comb, both really interesting and both producing excellent results and honey show winners from you, Angela. So thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Mr. Henricks, can you talk to us about swarms and artificial, splits and swarms? Thank you.
I'm here talking about splits. To me, it's about hive management, hive population, trying to manage it from swarming, which is the main thing. So today I'm going to talk about splits. What is a split, why we split, when to split, and what to do before you do split, your preparation, and a couple of types of splits. I'm also going to talk about artificial swarming, what I look for, when to do it, and how we do it. The way I was taught has not failed me yet, and this was given to me by Carol, who came from Sally, and it's a really good process. You can see the disclaimer at the bottom. This is how I prefer, how I do my splits. There's millions of different ways that all beekeepers do, so this is just the way that I do it, and yeah. Okay, so what is a split? As the name implies, a split is literally splitting one of our strong hives in half, or sometimes in thirds. When you split into two, you need to make sure that, you can balance the hive because you don't want to make one too weak. And that's where it goes. If you're going into thirds, you need to have an idea of why you're doing that. Is it the long-term game or is it the short-term game? Because if you split it into three, it may not be as productive that particular season. Let's rock and roll. Okay, so why do we split a colony? So the main reasons, it's a free way of increasing your hive population. The risk of disease should be low as you know exactly where your bees are coming from. It also helps the risk of your hive swarming. And if you're like me, you'd rather keep your bees than let another beekeeper collect them free from a tree or a bush somewhere. I'm a bit tight in that respect. It's also worth a mention that you save the public from a bit of a scare when your bees do swarm in an urban setting. When most people see a swarm of bees flying through the air, they crap themselves and think they're going to be attacked by killer bees. That's not the case, and we spend a lot of time trying to educate the public that bees aren't as scary as they think. Yep, like I said, it's good for manage your hive population, reduce the risk of swarming. A good time to split is as close, in my opinion, it's as close to the bees wanting to do a natural swarm themselves. It would be when you have swarm cells in your hive or a little bit before that. I tend to work on bee numbers, so if my box is starting to pack out, I will just make a decision whether I'm going to split that in two and try and cut that swarm impulse in the knees, the bee's knees. Boom, boom. There you go. Okay, so ideally it's in mid-spring. Theoretically you can split anytime, but you need to think of all the different factors like food. When your queen starts to pump, and you can see she is populating the hive really well, you may have done this deliberately by stimulation feeding, or she's just an awesome queen that has taken off in preparation for the nectar flow. If you have a brood box, in my opinion, that has 8 frames of brood, it's probably a good idea to split. If you don't, then they're more than likely going to swarm. Mid-spring is probably the most common time to split, as they need lots of food and pollen sources to rebuild their colony. And if you do it too early, they don't have the resources, and if you do it too late, then you're going to affect your production. If there's not enough resources around, you'll have to do supplemental feeding to the split or to the parent hive as well. And it'll all depend on what hive stores are in the hive. Don't leave it too late to do your split, or you'll find yourself with 2 underpopulated hives when the nectar flow hits, and your honey crop will suffer. That may be acceptable to you if your objective is hive increases and you're planning for the next season as opposed to this season. So if you've got a new apiary that you want to set up and populate, and you're willing to take that loss for the year, which is fine. Again, just make sure that the hive you're splitting from is strong. You don't want to split a weak hive, because you'll just end up with 2 extremely weak hives. So what to prepare? You'll need something to put your split into. So depending on the purpose of splitting, this could be directly into a full-sized hive, or it could be into a nuke box for transportation. How are you going to queen your split? You need to, are you going to introduce a mated queen or a virgin queen, or perhaps a queen cell? You could also let the split take care of itself and raise their own queen. There are advantages and disadvantages of each one. Mated queens are really cool, but they get straight to work and start building out the colony. The downside is they're expensive, at around $60, $65 each, unless you breed your own, or you've got some contacts that can give you good deals. Virgin queens are a little bit cheaper, around $50. The risk here is that there needs to be a good level of drones around for mating. So you need to think about the time of the season that you're splitting. It'll also take time for her to mate, and she may not come back if she's eaten by a bird or something, so there's always that risk. Queen cells, they're a little bit cheaper, sometimes between $5 and $7 odd. It has the same issues as the virgin queen, but with additional delays, because the queen needs to emerge, and it could be a few weeks before her mating flights start. You'll also have the risk of the cell failing, so if that happened, you'd have to repeat the process. Additionally, you'll need to have a cell carrier and keep them at the desired temperature, and also you need to protect them. Colony self-replacement. This is obviously the cheapest option, as it's free, but it takes the longest time. So depending on what your beekeeping is all about, if you're more hobbyist type beekeeping, they just want the bees to do what they want to do, which is really cool. But when you start merging into the semi-commercial sort of environment, you don't have the time to do that. So it really depends on what your beekeeping methods are. I've mainly used mated queens in the past, and they've been really successful. Last year I was lucky enough to pick up some spare queen cells from a bee club member, and I replaced, I think it was six queens that way, and it was really successful. I was happy with the method and also the result. And I'm likely to start using that going forward, because it is a lot cheaper, and I am trying to, as part of my management plan, start requeening more regularly, instead of getting to a weak queen and having hive problems and then requeening, so it's just how I'm trying to plan things this year. What frames do you take? I prefer to take newer frames, as it's harder for the bees to manipulate and create queen cells in older wax, if you're letting them do it themselves. Dark wax typically has a few layers of pupil scale in the bottom of the cells, and this isn't essential, but it's just my preference. You're going to look at taking 4 to 5 frames of brood from your first hive, we'll call that the old hive, and place them in the middle of your split, your nuke, or your new hive. Where am I going? Ensure that you're selecting the best frames with a good diversity of brood. You know, you want a lot of new eggs, you want some fresh larvae, some nice plump larvae, and some capped brood. You'll also want to ensure that you have some pollen stores and honey stores in each box, because obviously you want to feed them. It's also worth a reminder that the first thing that we should be doing before we're splitting anything is a disease inspection. You know, you need to ensure that you're not splitting any diseased hives such as AFB or any brood that has high varroa count or any varroa related viruses. You only want to split a good healthy hive. So, you know, there's a plug for disease management. Okay, next one. How do you split? Okay, so these are, like I said earlier, everyone does their own little way. This is my way of doing a walk-away split. You know, you go into an apiary, you want to split your bees, but I don't have time to come back and forward over the next few days. So first thing you need to do is set up your hiveware next to where you're splitting from, and give yourself room to work. Ideally, you want to do this on a sunny day so you can see into the bottom of your cells easily. I also find that the bees are a little bit calmer on a nice sunny day because they're more interested in going out foraging than they are trying to sting me in the face. Oh, but I'm normally wearing a veil, so you know, all good. And we all have differing levels of sight, so sharp eyes are a good thing for this particular task. I go and find the queen and put her into a little queen cage, a little queen catcher. This ensures that she goes where I want her to go at the end. You know, I'm pretty sure anyone that's done a split at some stage has split your bees and then you realize that you've put the queen in the split, or you know, you've put her where you don't want her to be. I put the cage on the edge, 3 frames of the hive on the opposite side that I'm working from, because I know that I'm going to get to her, and it's more than likely that those 2 or 3 frames are going to be pollen and honey stores, and it's unlikely that I'm going to be pulling out brood from that area. It reduces the risk of me accidentally knocking her into the grass, off the hive into the grass, or you know, anything could happen. So just know where your queen is and keep her safe. Now you need to find those 4 or 5 strong brood frames as mentioned, and you need to place them in the middle of your new hive or nuke. I also look for honey stores and pollen stores at the same time, because I want to try, like I said, you know, you've got to split them and make sure that you can give them the best opportunity to rebuild. If there are not enough stores, it'll leave the parent hive, if there are not enough stores in the parent hive, I will leave that and then I will supplement feed the nuke. And it's all about knowing what's flowering and around your area. What stores do you have for your bees to feed on? Oh, there's more. I can scroll. Yeah, you'll need to add a good amount of nurse bees to your split. Yep. I tend to shake 4 or 5 frames of bees into the split. So that's quite simple. You just pick a frame up and then you just go boom, quick sharp drop into the middle of your nuke. And I would advise reducing the entrance of your hive down to an appropriate size, maybe a few finger spaces, just while they re-establish, because you want to reduce the risk of robbing. And those damn wasps, you know, they're pretty malicious this time of year, and they have been for the last couple of years. Once I've done that, I put it back together. I move the split at least 2 to 3 meters away from the original hive. This way, any foraging bees that leave the new split will return to the original hive. Or I take it, you know, off-site to another apiary. There's mixed reviews about when to add a replacement queen to your split. This could be, you know, immediately. It could be a few hours or a day later. You know, personally, I like to leave the split for 24 hours and then put the introduction of a queen cage or a cell. This is just so the bees that are in that nuke or the split know that there is no queen there. And then once I put it in, they can say, oh, look, there's a queen cell in there, we're all good. If using a cell, make sure you protect it by putting you know, a little piece of plastic tubing around the edge of the cell, or maybe some tin foil, or a cell protector, because you know, if there is a little bit of angst, they could go in there and kill it out. Okay, so there's just a couple of random pictures. All the pictures in my PowerPoint presentation, by the way, are kindly donated by Auntie Google. So if anyone owns these pictures, I apologize, and I'm giving you the shout out. So you can see these are just photos of splits. The top one there is a full hive, and then you can see the split that's been taken from it. Next slide here. Okay, how do you split? This is the second method. So this is sorry, I should have said the first one is when you can find your queen. You know, it's easy, you know where she is, so you can then just split it, put your queen where you need, and off you go. For people that struggle to find your queen, or if she's just hiding and you can't find her, you know, you can do this method. As with the first method, you'll start everything the same way. You know, you need to set up your hiveware, you need to get everything sorted, including your queen exclude. You need a queen excluder as well. Make sure, so make sure you have your new queen or cell ordered, because you need a bit of time to get those things delivered to you. With this method, there's no need to find the queen, like I said. I would still look for her on every frame, you know, because if you do find her, then you might as well use the first option. I think this one here is just a backup option if I really need to split but I can't find her. Okay. What I do here, so I stack. I'm a tall guy, you know, so I don't like bending over too much. My back gets a bit sore, so I'll stack an empty box on the ground, and then I'll put another box on top just so it's a little bit higher for me. I'll go into the hive, and I think I'm on the wrong slide. Yeah, so stack everything up. You don't need all the other hiveware, okay? So you only need one box at this stage. You'll need all the additional hiveware the next day, or a few hours later at least. So as method one, you're going to take 4 or 5 frames of brood from your hive and place them into the middle of your brood box, or your that first box I just said. You're going to check each frame for the queen. If you find her, put her in the queen clip and revert to option 1. If you can't find her, then what you do is you go over the original hive, you find a good frame that you want to put into your split, you shake all the bees into the original hive, and then put that frame into the box, and you do that for your 4 or 5 frames. Now you know that the queen's going to be down in that bottom box because you've shaken all the bees in there. You know, ideally you would have found her if she was on those frames, but you know, it's not the end of the world. Once you've done that, you then put your queen excluder on top of the old hive, okay, and then you put your box with the brood and no bees back on top of the hive. If you've got honey supers, you can stack those on top, and then you close it up. It'll take a few hours for the nurse bees from the bottom box to climb up into the brood box, the top brood box. And after, you know, I leave it for 24 hours, like I said, and then you can simply walk up, just take that box off, put it on a base, and you can see that the box is fully populated with nurse bees. Ideally, it shouldn't have a queen in it if you did your job right, but you know, I have had situations where I thought I had shaken everything off and I hadn't. So that's that. Oh yeah, and once you've split your 2 hives, you then need to introduce your queen. Same as option 1, you need to get your queen in there, you know, a little bit later. Yeah, so that's everything I've got to say about about splits. I'm sure I've missed a whole heap of stuff out and got things wrong, and I'm sure I'll get told off a bit later. So I'm going to talk about artificial swarms now. So the principle of an artificial swarm is to separate the queen and the flying bees from the brood and the nurse bees. Okay, so it's imitating that swarm feeling that they have. I'll put another disclaimer out there that the method I'm showing you is the one that was in the journal, I don't know when, ages ago. It's also on the website, so I can share that link when I send out the recording for this webinar. And it was written up by Sally, and it's never failed me, so it's really good. So first off, you need to move your existing hive from, we'll call this the old hive going forward, and you move it at least 1 meter to 2 meters away from the current hive. Okay, and then the second step is to build an empty hive on the old site, you know, so you populate it with your frames, you have the whole thing there. Personally, I like to use drawn out frames, or at least 2 or 3 drawn out frames, because it gives the queen something to do as soon as she gets in there, and the bees, the other bees that are there, can start drawing out the empty frames. Yep, and ideally you want to put in a couple of frames of food as well. You know, put in some pollen and honey frame out of the old hive, just so they've got some stores while they're starting to get themselves rearing to go. Once you've set your hive up, you then need to go back to your old hive, and you must find your queen. You know, if you can't find your queen, then there's no point doing this process. Little disclaimer, what I actually do is I actually find my queen first, and then I move my hive 1 meter away, because if I've had instances where I can't find her and I've had to close up the hive and come back another day. So you just need to take that into consideration when you're doing this. Once you catch her, you move her to the new hive in the old spot. Okay, you put her in there, and then you shake in a bunch of bees. You know, so similarly to the splits, you just take, I do 3 or 4 frames, maybe 5 frames, depending on how many bees there are. I'll hold the frame over the new box, put it down into the box, and go one sharp shake, and you'll see all the bees drop. You do that 3 or 4 times. All the flying bees from the old hive, when they leave that hive, they'll go out to forage, and then when they return, they'll return to the old hive, which is actually the new hive in the old spot, you know, thinking it was their original home. So it makes sure that there's enough foraging bees that go back to that queen to help re-establish, because they're going to need to draw on honey stores, to draw out wax, and then pollen to feed the young. Yep, so the other thing is you go back to your old hive and do your inspection. You can remove any extra queen cells. Most people suggest that you only keep 1 or 2, which is fine. You put your queen excluder on if you had one, and then you can put your supers back on top if you were already supered up. And that's basically it. You're all done. In my first few years, I spent a lot of time catching swarms from my own hives. And I had to figure out how to get smarter, because I couldn't travel every day, if not twice a day, out to an apiary just to catch a swarm, you know. And when I came across this method here, it hasn't failed me yet, and I'm really thankful to Carol for handing it over, but for Sally for writing it down, because it's so straightforward. And like I said, I will include the link in the printout when I send out the recording. And that is me, so boom, thank you very much. Over to you, Mr. Steve.
Thanks, Dave. It's a really interesting one. Yeah, it was a good article by Sally, and as Dave says, he'll put a link to it in the email that's sent out later on. Yep, we've been swarming quite heavily over the past couple of weeks. Today is probably quite a lovely day for swarms out there. It's nice and bright. So, yeah, be aware of where your hives are up to and their desire to swarm at this time of year. Get down into your brood area, have a look at those brood frames, check for queen and queen cells, but also it's a good idea if you're going through and doing an inspection, if you've got queen cups in there, so they will prepare queen cups just as a sort of a practice run. Have a look inside them first, make sure they've got no royal jelly and so forth in there, so they're not an active cell, but it might be an idea to scrub out those queen cups on the way through. But yep, don't just let them swarm. I had somebody phone up the other day. A hive had moved into his roof on his house, and he had only just re-roofed, so he had a brand new roof in there. And I said, well, you've got 2 options. You either tear your roof open and we can recover the hive and the swarm from out of your roof, which you're not going to want to do having just re-roofed, or you're going to have to kill them off, which is unfortunately the action he's had to take. So if we're wanting to avoid killing swarms off which have moved into unacceptable places, then take the action first to actually prevent that hive from swarming. And that artificial swarm is an absolutely excellent method. Thanks for that one, Dave.
There's talking about swarms and just managing your swarms. I personally think as beekeepers we have a responsibility to the public to manage our swarms the best we can. Ideally we shouldn't have swarms, more so in urban areas, but some beekeepers choose not to manage it and they just let their bees swarm, which is quite a bad look on the rest of the beekeeping community. So if you can give yourself a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of understanding of the life cycle of the bees and what's going on around springtime, you can normally avoid it. You know, you can't always avoid it, but if you can avoid it more often than you can't, then you don't, I should say. You know, that's a good thing because, yeah, I've got one guy that I've picked 6 swarms up from his property. He's got 20 hives on his property and his hives just keep swarming into the neighbour's property. So I just go along and keep picking up these swarms and the guy just doesn't care. You know, so we need to start managing these people a bit better.
Yep.
Anyway.
Be a responsible beekeeper. Look after your neighbours as well as your bees, definitely. Do you want to kick off the interview, Dave, with Heather?
Yep. Just give me a minute.
Great.
Good afternoon, Heather. Thank you for your time, and it's great to have this chat with you as a taster for to your talk for the next club day in November. I loved your TED talk you did in Tauranga. It's such a fascinating area of research. We're fortunate to have a renowned microbiologist here at Massey University. What led you to Albany all the way from California?
Yeah, it's a long story, but I'll tell you the short version, and that is I was a high school student in California, but my family was originally from Utah, which is the beehive state in the US, as it turns out. And so I had strong family ties to Utah, and I went to Utah as an undergraduate. And there I worked in a microbiology laboratory on evolution. And after my time as an undergraduate at the University of Utah, I joined a laboratory in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania as a PhD student. And that was where I first got my first real exposures to bacteriophages. And bacteriophages are the tiny viruses that can infect bacteria. And that's a lot of what we'll talk about today and a lot of what we'll talk about in November. So I got to know the people at the Pittsburgh Bacteriophage Institute, and one of the senior professors there was from England and suggested that for my postdoctoral work, I had to look at someone at the University of Oxford. And so I eventually got a Human Frontier of Science Program Fellowship and moved to the biochemistry department in Oxford and did 3.5 years of research there before joining Massey University as a lecturer and working in the laboratory of a really famous evolutionary microbiologist named Professor Paul Rainey, who is now in France and has a laboratory in Germany. But in the meantime, I've taken a permanent position at Massey Albany, and I've been here for 10 years now. But actually in January, my laboratory will be moving to Canterbury. So the University of Canterbury has offered me a position as a senior lecturer in microbiology, and so I'll be moving very soon.
Oh, that's a shame. It's nice to have you here for 10 years while we did. So what exactly is your area of study and how does it affect beekeepers?
So my laboratory works on 2 different things. We're interested in how bacteria evolve in response to their predators. And when I say predators in that context, we're really talking about these single-celled eukaryotic amoeba that eat them on surfaces. And so we're interested in how the exposure to those types of organisms in the soil might affect their evolution. Does it make them more likely to become pathogens? Does it make them more likely to start cooperative relationships? So those sorts of things. So that's half the laboratory. The other half of the laboratory works on bacteriophages, which, as I said, are these viruses that infect bacteria. And about 4 years ago now, we decided that after having done some undergraduate projects with phage finding, that it would be really great if we found and applied some application for bacteriophages in New Zealand that hasn't been tried yet, but that has evidence overseas. And so we settled on the Penibacillus larvae organism, which causes American foul brood. And we've spent the last 3 years discovering bacteriophages here in New Zealand that are able to infect and destroy American foul brood causing organisms before they're able to infect the bee larvae. So that's how we've gotten into thinking more about honeybees.
Wow, that's exciting. Good luck with that. Um, So is your study of bacteriophages related to the use of viruses by some Eastern European countries instead of antibiotics?
Yes. So bacteriophages were discovered about over 100 years ago now, and in places in Russia and Poland and Georgia and a little bit in France, they were used at one point as medicines. So they were used instead of antibiotics. So as antibiotics were being developed in England and in the West, bacteriophages were being used in some of those same ways in these sort of Eastern Bloc countries. And as a result of that, we ended up with these two different types of technologies that have different advantages. One of the advantages of trying to use bacteriophages is that there are more bacteriophages on Earth than anything else. So there are 10 to the 31 of them, which is this just like astronomically big number. They're all over us. So you are covered with bacteriophages right now. There are bacteriophages in the milk that we drink, in the water that we drink, in the food that we eat, all over us, inside of us. We are just surrounded by these tiny viruses, and they're incredibly diverse. And the cool thing about them is that they tend to have specific hosts that they infect. So if we take an antibiotic, it can destroy a lot of the good bacteria in our gut. And also then there's a tendency for those bacteria to evolve resistance to those antibiotics. But if we use a bacteriophage in the same way, it's only going to kill the bacteria that it is able to infect, and it's going to leave the rest of them alone. So it's actually this very natural way of hurting something that's an enemy while preserving the things that are good for guts of organisms and hosts, and protecting some of that diversity.
Thank you. Is there any way that citizen scientists can help in the search for bacteriophages?
Citizen science has been an incredibly important part of our hunt for bacteriophages in New Zealand so far. So we, as me and my PhD student and my master's student who've been working on the ABATE project, which is the Active Bacteriophages for AFB Eradication project, we do not have access to beehives. I'm not a beekeeper and my student's not a beekeeper. And as it turns out, in our hunt, healthy beehives has been the place where we have found these bacteriophages so far. So in some of our healthy beehives, we already have these bacteriophages kind of standing guard and protecting the beehives against incursions by this Pennybacillus larvae organism that causes American foulbrood. So in order to get access to soil and bee debris samples from hives across the country, we've actually used a citizen science approach. So we put out a call. We had a little infographic that we passed out at the Apiculture NZ conference, and we sent it around to a bunch of beekeeping clubs like the Auckland Beekeepers Club. And that way we had people suggest that they would like to send us samples, and we sent them prepaid envelopes with sample tubes so that they could send us soil samples that we could then search for bacteriophages. And in this project over the last 3 years, we had, I think, over 430 samples sent to us from across New Zealand, the North Island and the South Island. And we ended up finding 33 bacteriophages that we've just sequenced. And I'll be able to talk a little bit about what we've named them, or what people who've helped discover them have named them, and what their genomes are like when I talk to your club. So
Excellent.
It's been absolutely crucial.
Excellent. Are you still looking for samples, or is that? So
yeah,
someone could send in a sample, and if they discovered it, they could name it after themselves.
That's right. Yeah, so we're going to be putting out another call for phages, I think, in 2022. We'll get in touch with people and say, you know, we'd love to take soil samples at this point. We have found bacteriophages that are really good in infecting a couple or most of the bacterial strains that we have from New Zealand. So we have a sampling of about 30 strains of this pathogen, this AFB causing pathogen, but we found 2 of those 30 that we haven't been able to find any bacteriophages that are able to infect them. So we're still on the hunt for, you know, we got to take down those 2 so that we can come up with a combination of these bacteriophages that we could put into a hive, and whatever bacterial pathogen showed up in that hive, those bacteriophages would be ready for that fight. So we want to make sure that we have the whole diversity of the pathogens covered.
How much of an issue is the use of antibiotics in agriculture, and will it inevitably cause complete antibiotic resistance?
So bacteria in the environment. So I'm a microbiologist. I love bacteria. But one of the things that I've studied during my career is how bacteria can exchange pieces of genetic information. And because bacteria have been battling for resources for probably 3 billion years on this planet, they have invented a lot of antibiotics, and they have encountered a lot of antibiotics that other organisms like mold or yeast or other types of organisms have made in order to kill them. So there's an ongoing battle, chemical battle happening all around us that involves, bacteria on the one hand trying to defend themselves, and other organisms trying to make sure that the bacteria aren't stealing their stuff or eating their food or whatever. And then, we came into this fray and chose some of these antibiotics and produced huge amounts of them and started using them maybe a little indiscriminately sometimes. And the bacteria are one, very fast in terms of their evolution, and two, have the ability to trade pieces of genetic material between them in order to make sure that they have all of the tools that they need to fight the battles that they're up against. So this process of bacteria evolving on the one hand and then acquiring antibiotic resistance is happening around us all the time. And the more we use antibiotics, the more we make the antibiotic resistance genes favored in the environment. So by using antibiotics in agriculture, we really drive more resistance. And that's a process that we can't stop. By the same token, bacteria will also evolve resistance to things like bacteriophages. But because there are 10 to the 31 bacteriophages on the planet, and only maybe like 20 flavors of antibiotics or antimicrobials, I think the likelihood that we can find combinations of bacteriophages that we can use to combat bacteria is really good. I think the numbers are on our side when it comes to the using phages in things like agriculture.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that bacteriophages will be utilizing them much more in the future, and they'll be taking over from the antibiotics?
I would love that, right? Like I have a lot of hope for the field of bacteriophages and them being used in medicine and agriculture. I think it's an incredibly exciting area of research in the future. I think there will be opportunities for us to use these things in combination. There has been research that suggests that there are certain types of bacteriophages that if you use them, they make the bacteria more sensitive to antibiotics that they might not otherwise be sensitive to. So there are nice places where these will synthesize well. And those are also areas that are worth studying in the future. So I would love to see us getting more into this field of bacteriophage research. That's something that I mentioned, of course, in my grants, that like if we start getting both the mental and physical infrastructure here in New Zealand to do something like produce bacteriophages to protect beehives against something like AFB, those same resources are things that we can use in the future, both in terms of people and in terms of physical infrastructure, to do the same types of problem solving for other parts of industry, other parts of agriculture, but also getting into producing bacteriophages that we can use in medicine. So I think this is the sort of project and the sort of, key to getting us into solving these types of problems and other types of problems with bacteriophages in the future.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Heather. It's very nice to talk to you, and I look forward to meeting you in November. Hopefully we'll be having a face-to-face club meeting then. And it's
fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, very great, all the stuff that you're doing to help us beekeepers. And yeah, thank you very much. And we'll see you in November.
Thanks again, Ken.
Thank you.
I don't know about you, but I found that an absolutely fascinating interview and discussion.
I had to edit it, and I've watched it 3 times now because I've really enjoyed what was said.
It was absolutely incredible. I hadn't realised that there was a history of using bacteriophages in medicine in Eastern Europe. In the latest Beekeeper, which just dropped into my letterbox yesterday, there's an article there on using PCR testing to actually find AFB in hives. We know PCR testing, of course, because it's what we're using to find the coronavirus, COVID. I have a mental picture when I was reading this article in the Beekeeper of holding up a bee and trying to get a swab up her nose so that you could take a good sample of it. I'll leave you with that particular thought, and you'll need to read the article to find out the actual information about how they're doing PCR testing to find AFB in hives. I just wonder if anybody has questions that they wish to ask relating to their own hives or the time of year or the things which have been raised this morning, and we can get the panelists to answer them. Any questions out there from our attendees?
I think there was a good chat going on whilst the presentations were there, so there were lots of questions, which was good.
Yeah, we were talking about how to do the cut comb and the right way to put it round and stuff like that. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, the first bee club meeting I've been to where there hasn't been a question. Oh, okay, there's a question.
There's always one.
Okay, there's another question here for you, Angela, saying, "Hi, Angela, can you please show how you put in the next 3 frames for honeycomb?"
Yeah, I can. I just need to.
Is it the same for the first 3, or does it zigzag back?
No, it zigzags. I zigzag it to keep everything straight. So, first one, second one, third one. So that's all going that direction. Then the next ones go that direction. So it was a good question. Back to the middle. Whoop. And then get this next one out. Back to that side. So that way, and then turn around, come back the other way, turn around, go back that way. And then that just only gives them, small amounts of room so that they're not going to build any crazy comb. Hopefully that's answered that question.
Yep, that's cool. We've got another question here. We found a queen cell with royal jelly in a hive. What do we do with it? I'll have a go at that first. I think you need to figure out whether that's a swarm cell or a supersedure cell. So typically it depends on where on the frame it is. If it's down the bottom, of a frame, it's more than likely a swarm cell. So you need to manage that out, maybe split or do an artificial swarm. If the cell is halfway up the frame or towards the top of the frame, it's more than likely a supersedure cell where your queen is starting to get old, and the bees have identified that, so they are replacing her. Anyone else want to add to that? No? Okay. Next question. There's one here from Tim. Can increasing the capacity of the hive at this time of year also reduce swarming, i.e. adding a box? Yeah. Well, space is one of the key things with swarming, so if they run out of space, or the pheromone of the queen starts to get too diluted through the hive, they're going to start thinking about swarming. Yeah, it's a hard one, because you could add, if that impulse has already been triggered, it doesn't matter how many boxes you've added. It's probably more of a deterrent than anything, in my opinion.
Yeah, Shah has asked much the same question, adding another brood box to help reduce swarming while she's waiting for new queens to arrive in November. Well, it should help, but you just got to keep an eye on it, I think.
Okay, next question here. We've got one here saying, any recommendations on how to manage a swarm once they have been caught? Yep, it's called a beehive. You put it in one and you start managing it as a beehive. If anyone catches a swarm and they don't want to increase their beehive numbers, we do have some new members of our club that are new to beekeeping, so they would be more than happy to take a swarm. We also have contacts with a whole bunch of tertiary providers that are teaching level 3 and level 4 beekeeping. So there's lots of students out there that are looking for bees, and I'm sure there's a lot of beekeepers looking for swarms as well. So there's many options there.
In terms of management, Dave, I think at this time of the year, just keep an eye on the hives that they've got enough food, that they might need feeding in the new once you put them in a hive.
Yeah.
To keep them going until they get established.
Yeah, and rural settings are also a lot harder than urban settings. So if you've got bees, or you place a swarm somewhere where there's not a huge population of people and flowers and gardens, you need to really think about what food sources you've got around. Seeing starving bees is not a happy thing to see. Another question here. Let's just get rid of that one. We did that. Gee, Aaron, you're on a roll, my man. How are you doing? I haven't seen you in a long time. Is this whole Zoom meeting, the recording, going to be uploaded? Yep. So I should say, once the meeting's finished, I will carve the recording up and make it look all pretty and upload it to YouTube and send that link out to all the members. I will also include the link to the article that Sally wrote. And Steve, is that thing you were talking about before, is there a link to that anywhere? Something.
Which one I was talking about before? You mean the PCR testing, and so forth? It's in the latest Beekeeper magazine, which if people are registered, they will get that through their letterbox.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay, another one here. Is a queen
likely or possible to be old after one season? Queens can often go for up to 3 years or even slightly longer sometimes. We tend now to replace them more frequently, and sometimes, as you say, Dave, you're doing it annually. And things like that, but I would not regard a year-old queen as being old. I would still think she's got lots of legs in her left, provided she's had a good mating, and that, of course, is the secret to it. Remember, she's fed beautifully, she's groomed, she's looked after by the nurse bees in the hive, so she's never going to be short of food. The only thing is, provided she's had a good mating, then she should be good for several years of egg laying, and it was really only if she's had a less than adequate mating that she might run out early and need replacing.
It's probably worth a mention as well that queens tend to have their most prolific, I don't even know if I ever say that word right, but that's how my brain says it, prolific laying pattern in the first season. So younger, newer queens tend to be better layers. However, in saying that, you could get a queen that lasts 2 or 3 years, like Steve was saying, depending on how well she's been mated.
Yeah.
Karen also made a very good point in the chat. When you get a swarm, you don't know where that swarm has come from, unless you do, But if you don't know where it's come from, it could have anything wrong with it. It could have AFB, it could have Varroa, not as many Varroa as in the hive, but those are all considerations to take. When I catch swarms, I tend to put them into a quarantine apiary and leave them there for 1 season, or at least 2 or 3 months, and then I might move them depending, but you need to factor that in to your decision making. Carol also said, when bees start to build wax on the hive mat. Oh yeah, that's a really good point. So you guys know your hive mat, and when you crack your hive cover off and take it off, and you see it's got lines of white wax. If you see that, they definitely need space. I remember, who's the AFB dude from down in the Manawatu? You know, he wrote the book, AFB book, Mark Goodwin. Yeah, so Mark Goodwin said that if you see your bees putting burr comb on the mat like that, it means that you've already missed an opportunity of putting a box on, because you should have already put the box on before that started.
You're normally looking to put another box on when your existing super is half full, and certainly anything above that, I'd be looking to put additional supers in there to give them room. You can get sudden nectar flow come if you have a good run of weather, and you've got your girls are out there and foraging hard. You think maybe, oh, I'll go back in again in 10 days or 2 weeks and do another check for swarming or something like that, and you can find they've filled that entire box up. So yeah, anything wax up on the hive mat or existing super half full or above, I'd be looking to put another box on.
Yeah, cool. There's 2 questions there, one from Stephen and a sort of follow-up from Karen, which sort of roll into each other. The point Karen's making is second-year queens are more likely to swarm than first-year queens, so you don't typically get swarms from new queens. So that is a management practice that a lot of commercials use. It's easier for them just to replace all of their queens every year, so they don't have to deal with swarming, you know, but they also do splits and the like. Stephen Stewart, you've put in there, with the view on preventions of swarm and artificial management, society should be happy with the introduction of Varroa. It has reduced the natural beehives. Possibly the split of humans from nature is a challenge also in the equation. More education to the wider public. Is that more a statement than a question, you guys think?
I think more a statement and an opinion, but yeah. There's a question there. Any developments with Auckland Council's review of hive numbers on residential properties? That is being considered this month. So October was the time where, having taken all the feedback, that they were going to be considering it and then arriving at a decision later. I should imagine that with lockdown and urgent work only being done, that it may well be delayed. But there was not expected, even if they decide on an alteration to the rules, i.e. imposing a strict limit, there was an expectation that that would not take effect until the end of the first quarter next year. So March, April sort of thing as we're going in, but no update on their on the council's review at this stage.
There was one question in there that I've just answered via text, but I'll mention it as well. It was around saying I've got a beehive with lots of bees in it and I've got some strips in there. When do I take them out? So I get a lot of people asking this question, and the answer's the same. Read the directions on the packet, you know, and that is one of the reasons why we start getting resistance to treatments. People put them in, they don't really realise how long they leave them in for. I had one guy last year who had left them in for 3 months, 4 months, and the honey flow's coming in, and he goes, oh, when do I take them out? I said, you know, read the packet. So yeah, just make sure we do that, because resistance is a bit of an issue.
The other thing that I emphasise to anybody who asks is, before taking your strips out, do your monitoring of your mite drop, either through a count board on the bottom or through a sugar shake or an alcohol wash. So don't just assume that your strips have done the job, take them out at the end of 6 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever it is, depending on the type of strip, walk away and think that the job is done. It's not done unless you actually are actively certain that your strips have done the job. Because it might be, for example, that you put a particular strip in and your bees may have a resistance to that strip, And so at the end of the appropriate period, you've still got lots of mites in there. You would then potentially take your strips out at the end of the period and then use an alternate treatment to continue to look after your mites in your hive. So by all means, know what your treatment period is for those strips, but check your mites either through a drop board or a alcohol wash or sugar shake, and don't just assume that your strips have done the job. That's very important.
Yeah. Just before you answer that question, David, so the more clarity on the question, which is good. So the strip came in a nuke, okay, which is completely understandable because you don't have a packet. One of the rules that you should try and drum into yourself is when you're obtaining bees from someone else, always ask your beekeeper for the beekeeping registration number. Ask them for get a guarantee, guarantee it for at least 30 days, if not 60, against defect in terms of Varroa or AFB, anything like that. And also ask them what the treatment plan has been. What did you treat last season and what are you treating now? And when did you put it in? You need to get all that information from that person, otherwise you run the risk of under-treating or over-treating. You also run the risk of using the same treatment because you just don't know. So those are all questions I would ask.
Yeah, good point.
David, you're asking that question. No?
Okay. Aaron asking about...
I just said, sorry, I said 6 weeks for the strips.
Ah, okay, cool.
Okay, yeah. Just be aware that Apivar has changed its recommendation. Used to be 6 weeks and now saying 8 to 10 weeks for Apivar. It's effective, but it's slower to take action. So, yeah, check your check the instructions on the box.
Yeah, Alan's asked a question down there saying, Steve and Dave, if we have split nukes and hives that will be ready for sale, can we say on the site? Yeah, good on you, Alan. Nice way to put it in there, brother. Yeah, so just like anything, if you've got wares for sale, we can always advertise them through the club somehow. The notice board and Club Hub is there that we can use. It's not particularly user friendly, so I don't tend to use it too much, but we can think about how to get that across to our members.
Facebook potentially?
Yeah, Facebook's a bit different because that goes wider, and I think the committee needs to have a discussion around whether we want to advertise on behalf of our members or whether we just want to keep it to the club. Yep. But I'm sure that we can take that offline here and come back to you, Alan.
Yep.
On that one. Aaron, you've got another question saying we have a hive doctor feeder that we put syrup in, and last year it was fine, but this year seems to have caused them to drown. Yeah, okay, so I've experienced that as well. What you need to do is you need to get some sticks or some bracken or something and stuff it down into that cone so the bees can climb down there, and if they start to drown they can actually climb up and out. I use a lot of top feeders in spring, and this year I've started to transition from having the sides of the feeders in to just having bracken in the top without any of the chimney or the sides on, because it just seems easier. Every time I've done it, it just seems easier for the bees to go up, walk around, and then when they're finished they just go back downstairs. So that's my opinion.
And also question about, can a hive die if you put in too much Varroa treatment? It can depend on the treatment. Some treatments have more impact on different things. So formic acid, for example, has more of an impact on the queen and her laying of brood. So it's one to be aware of if you're using something like Formic Pro, for example. In general, I would say no, that it's unlikely because the treatment within the strips is fairly much a measured delivery. So it releases gradually by the bees walking over the strip. But you end up with then, if you put too much treatment in, I would say simply go with the recommendation. 4 strips of Baverol per brood box, 2 strips of Apistan, 2 strips of Apivar, that type of thing. I would stick with the recommended dosage. They've done the tests. They've checked it to make sure that that doesn't leave excess amount of chemical residue inside the hive and in the wax and things like that. So, but it's unlikely to kill the hive, but I think it's more about contamination of the hive and the wax and things like that with chemicals that I'd be cautious of.
Can you use supered honey from a hive with a treatment in as stores for winter? Yeah, there's no harm in feeding that stuff back to the bees. It's just not safe for human consumption. I do think, considering that this is a field day and theoretically we're all standing in a paddock with a shed behind us, you know, that there wouldn't be any reason why we couldn't mention Alan and Kay. So Alan and Kay are reducing their hive numbers because they're getting old. I mean, it's getting too much work. So we can drop you guys Alan's number and you can reach out to them and discuss anything that they've got if anyone wants to purchase stuff. So yeah.
Yep. Why not? Alan and Kay have been helpful, good members of the club for many years. Okay, I think that might be just about it for our questions.
Yeah, that's it. And we're basically on time, a couple of minutes to go.
Yep.
Karen, you're doing an awesome job in terms of keeping that chat going, and I completely agree with everything you're saying around varroa treatments. Resistance is the big one for synthetics, making sure that you're not overdosing and you are sticking to the timeframes. With your organic treatments, you can tend to use them a little bit more, but depending on what treatment it is, it can be a little bit harder on the bees. Yeah.
Radio, ladies and gents, I'm afraid there's nothing further to report on the move of the club over to our new location yet. Obviously, we're still under lockdown, and that lockdown applies to the council as well. So our application is still in front of the council. So as soon as we can get some movement and some response from the council, we'll let you know and get moving on that as fast as we can. I'm hoping as soon as we come up out of level 3, fingers crossed, that we will actually hold in-person meetings and we will communicate those to you, and even wait until we get our hives into the new location and everything like that. It'll still be really good to have an in-person meeting, and we will look to do that as soon as we possibly can, and so forth. So watch the space. We'll let you know as soon as we've got anything to report, and I'm just sorry that we've been knocked sideways by COVID as well as everything else at the moment. Keep your hive safe, keep yourself safe, look after things, look after each other, and thank you very much indeed for coming along to today and this month's meeting, and thank you very much indeed for all those people who have prepared presentations. Angela, David, and Ken for his interview. Absolutely fascinating. Always worthwhile dialing into these meetings. Thank you very much indeed. We'll end it there.